Welcome to Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First Investigates. I'm Sierra Cummings, joined now by Andy Parati. Andy, you've got a really devastating story for us today. Patricia Heller died in 2003 in a car crash. Can you explain why the case is relevant today?
Yeah, this is a case that literally has been litigated for more than 20 years, and earlier this year it finally went to trial. Well, after the verdict, the attorneys for the family found out something that got them a new trial. When Patricia Heller left the Atlanta airport in 2003 in a taxi, she would never reach her final destination.
The cab driver who was driving too fast lost control of the car, left the roadway and smashed into a grove of trees.
It happened on Interstate 85 in Hateville, toward downtown Atlanta. The roads were slick after a recent rain. The impact of the crash killed the 51-year-old immediately, leaving behind 2 children and Ed, her husband.
It turns out parts of her were up the roadway from the collision.
This woman had her head taken off.
The taxicab driver pleaded guilty to vehicular homicide for driving with unsafe tires. The incident report shows the tires were bald with no tread. Patricia's family filed a lawsuit against the driver, the taxicab company, and an Atlanta city inspector who passed the taxi's safety inspection just a day before the crash. James Potts is the family's attorney.
You know, this woman lost her life for reasons that never should have happened.
After 20 years of civil litigation, including the Georgia Supreme Court, the case was finally put in the hands of a Fulton County jury this past March. When the jurors reached their verdict, they found the taxicab company liable for Patricia's death, but not the driver or the city inspector. What was your reaction?
I was shocked. And for these jurors not to also hold the driver who pled guilty to vehicular homicide and unsafe tires, and the city inspector made no sense.
After the trial, the family's attorney spoke to some of the jurors. He wanted to know why they didn't hold the city inspector and the driver liable too. According to court documents, one of the jurors spoke up, claiming he was responsible for the verdict. That juror is Scott Kelly, seen here in his LinkedIn profile.
He said, quote, "I stopped that," close quote. Said it again, said, "I'm the one that stopped that."
Court transcripts show Scott identified himself as a corporate attorney during the jury selection process. But according to trial records, that wasn't the full truth. The Supreme Court of Illinois suspended Scott from practicing law in 2008 for withholding $10,000 from a client and other allegations, and since then has never been a licensed attorney in any state. Prospective jurors in Fulton County signed this form pledging to tell the truth about their occupation. And watch this video.
That's why it's important to be completely honest and truthful during the jury selection process.
Patricia's family appealed the jury's verdict, claiming Scott's actions were misconduct and he misrepresented his professional credentials. In July, the judge ordered a new trial, writing the jury's verdict was contrary to the weight of the evidence. The order does not address the family's claims of jury misconduct.
He was not a lawyer. You got to tell the truth.
I was really upset.
Scott declined multiple requests for an interview to respond to the allegations. No one beyond the family has accused him of misconduct. According to the National Center for State Courts, jury misconduct claims are on the rise, from less than 50 reported cases in 2000 to nearly 250 2 decades later.
Now to convicted murderer Scott Peterson's fight for a new trial.
In criminal trials, jury misconduct can lay the groundwork to free convicted criminals.
The request for a new trial centers around whether a juror lied when she told the court she had never been involved in a domestic violence case.
And in some cases, jurors can face repercussions themselves.
Yeah, I do find you in contempt.
Including a potential juror arrested in April last year for live streaming court proceedings on her phone, and the murder trial involving Atlanta rapper Young Thug. a crash that took the life of a wife and mother,
She was largely unrecognizable from the force of the accident.
and a family's long legal battle to hold who they believe is responsible 20 years later.
I just feel that I don't want to let the behavior that I've watched over these years get away with it.
You know, Andy, something I want to point out is that if a juror had any uncertainty about whether they had to disclose something, there is that video that they have to watch that makes it fairly clear, one would argue.
Yeah, I reached out to court administration. Basically, I wanted to find out exactly what you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Do they watch anything reminding them of their duties and their responsibility to tell the truth when they're about to be seated on a juror? And so I found that video, and then I found the juror sheet. They swear, they sign it saying that that juror sheet that they fill out, including their occupation, is true.
It seems like the judge does have some agreement with a new trial, but are you able to elaborate like the specific reason why this family will have to go through a new trial?
So to just go through process
Yeah.
a little bit, after the jury came back with its verdict, only holding one of the three liable, they appealed the verdict, and they appealed it for a number of reasons. One of them was that they allegedly believed that the juror committed some sort of misconduct by lying about what they did. Now, whether or not his inability to tell the truth about his occupation played a role, it was in the court filings itself. The judge, in his ruling, did not specifically name that misconduct, as we mentioned in the story. They just said it was preponderance of the evidence, and he essentially named himself the 13th juror by reversing the jury's verdict. That the liability of the former taxi cab company that now is defunct and bankrupt, that still holds. That $25 million verdict still hold,
Wow.
but they will now have an opportunity to go to trial and hold the other two liable, which is what they were trying to do in the first trial.
You've covered a lot about the criminal justice system, so you know more than anyone how the court system really works. Any chance that this new trial is coming soon?
So they were trying to get it done pretty quickly. Remember, all these family members of Patricia all live across the state. I mean, her husband lives in California. I think the daughter lives
logistics
in.
of it all, yeah.
Yeah, so like trying to get them to come is difficult, and then very taxing. They have to relive this, and have to talk about the last moments that they spent with their mother. One of the most poignant moments that I was not able to include in the story is when they had her son testify, and I wish I could have included this in the story, but he essentially is asked by his attorney, when was the last time that you remember talking to your mom? And he says, I was 10, and she was literally walking out of the kitchen to go catch her flight to Atlanta, and she kissed him goodbye. And just like a 10-year-old, he's like, oh, stop, Mom. That was the last time he ever saw or spoke to his mom. And so he has to relive that every single time he goes on trial. And so that's a long story to say. They hope to do it as soon as possible because they don't have to keep redoing this and having to sort of sit on it. Thank goodness that Mr. Heller agreed to talk to us about this. He is very determined. I asked him straight up, why not just give up? You got a $25 million verdict from the taxi cab company. I know you want to say on paper that they want to be held civilly liable, the taxi cab driver and that city inspector, and he basically says, at this point, it has nothing to do with the money. It's about just making sure that the people were responsible. He believes he was responsible for his wife's death are held accountable in the courts.
Yeah, and justice is all about perspective, so we hope they get to see this case go before the courts really soon. Your heart just breaks for that family. Just final thoughts here from the company. What have they said about all of this?
Well, the company's bankrupt. They haven't said anything because there's no one other than their insurance company that used to represent them that fought for 20 years not to get to trial. So they're not really saying anything. There's no company representatives to really talk at this point.
Well, we want to keep that family uplifted. We know you'll stay on top of this. Andy, thanks so much for joining us. You've been watching and listening to Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First Investigates. Be sure to watch and listen wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining us.